candidates today are Andrew Worthman, current acting president and vice president of the Eau Claire City Council, and Terry Weld, current city council member. We have 7 prepared questions, and then we'll take questions from the floor as time permits. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer the questions, and we will, did we flip a coin earlier?
Oh, we didn't flip a coin. We can flip a coin now. Somebody have a
Flip a coin now.
figure out who goes first.
To decide who goes first, so.
That's the
Does
same.
somebody have
Does somebody have a coin
coin?
in the box?
I was gonna say, I don't have a coin.
Maybe a coin flipping app on their phone.
I'm gonna say Terry's home team here.
What's that?
Call it, your home team, what do you wanna call it?
My home team?
Yeah.
I think people carry coins.
We have that
Here we go.
It is, it's gonna work.
All right.
Terry, you're gonna call it?
Sure. Tails?
Just like tails. Is it? I can't read it.
Give us tails.
Okay, so first question, remember you have 3 minutes to answer. Jen is going to run the clock and hold up the signs. So first question, pretty easy. Please tell us about your background and why you are running for city council president.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us here today. And my name is Terry Weld, and I'm running for city council president. I've been a council member for the past 2 years, and prior to that, I served on the planning commission for 6 years. The last 3 of those years as the planning commission chair. I got involved with city governing at that time and really came to enjoy it. It became a part of my life and a passion that continues to grow. I have spent the last 30 years building 2 businesses into successes. The first being Hooligans in downtown Eau Claire, which I owned and operated for 12 years and still continues to thrive today. The last 18 years I spent as a realtor here in the Chippewa Valley, and have built that into a very successful real estate business as well. I've sold over $140 million in real estate the last 18 years. And as a lot of you know, that's only possible by the importance of referrals and repeat business. And the only way that those referrals and those repeat businesses, repeat customers keep coming back is because of the job that I do. I work hard, I'm dependable, I'm reliable, I'm trusted, I'm compassionate, I'm creative. All the characteristics that make a business successful, and I've led that life for the last 30 years. My intention is to carry forward those characteristics as leader and as president of our city council. I believe that as a council we have to be mindful that there are 70,000 people that live in this community that all have needs and wants, and we need to make sure that we're conscious of those needs and always looking out for all segments of our community. So I'll lead with those ideas in mind. I feel that I am an independent thinker. I believe in common sense. I believe in leading by example. I believe in supporting those that we've entrusted. So I believe with my experiences, both living in this community for the last 45 years and understanding what this community means to me and to my family and to all of you, I will continue to work hard and look forward to serving as your president for the next year.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Andrew?
Thank you. Thank you, and I want to again thank the Realtors for having us this evening, this morning, and Chippewa Valley Home Builders as well for your role in bringing together this forum. My name is Andrew Worthman. I am the current acting president of the Eau Claire City Council and have served for 10 years on the City Council. I grew up on a organic dairy farm up in Osceola, Wisconsin, 600 acres. years. My family still owns the farm. But I've talked about in my campaign, we lived in the Appalachian Hills in my early childhood. I grew up in real poverty. And that's something that I've brought here on this campaign trail because it's something that I find is important to our success as a community, that we focus on issues related to poverty and affordability. I came to this community for university and ended up staying. I work for the Pew Charitable Trusts as a policy consultant, actually supporting our national parks, and have for the last 10 years. And so, both as a business owner and as someone who's advocated on federal policy, I bring that experience as well as my experience on city council to this role. Now, I would say over the last decade that I've been on city council, we've seen changing community, and we've seen 3,000 new jobs created. We have folks coming back to our community who are excited to be a part of it. And I think a lot of that's because of our investments in our quality of life and the amenities that make this a community where people want to live and raise a family and have a career. And so I'm proud of that success. I also know that we have to go further. And we've focused on the fact that 46% in our community are living paycheck to paycheck, and we still have folks that will be sleeping on our streets tonight. And that's why I'm proud that you've invited me here this evening. Sorry, this morning. I don't know why people thinking that. It's been a long campaign. But no, this idea of how do we help create more affordable homes for folks, and how do we make sure that everyone can afford that? And part of it is the success of our community. That if we have affordable housing in our community, then we're going to have people who are more likely to be able to partake in all the other things that make us a great community. Because we can't, in my opinion, we can't have, I believe it's roughly 13% of our community putting 50% of their paycheck every month into their rent and their mortgage. That's just not going to work long term. So the things I've been focusing on are affordable housing. In this campaign, I've also been focused on how do we improve and get more participation in our neighborhoods, strengthen our neighborhoods, and the last thing is sustainability, and focus on sustainability. So thank you for having me this morning.
Okay, question number 2 goes to Terry. In your opinion, what role should the city council play regarding the existing home, new home construction, and remodeling industry within the Chippewa Valley?
Yeah, obviously, our community continues to grow, and the demand for housing continues to grow with it. And certainly that we've realized now more than ever that the supply to meet that demand isn't there. As a community, I guess we need to be mindful of that. As a city council, we need to be conscious of this shortage. I feel it's our role to do everything we can to create more supply, create more housing in all price ranges, in all meeting all the needs of our community. So I guess I feel that it's important that we look at opportunities that we have as a governing body that can help builders and those that want to develop and those that are remodeling, and it starts with our codes, building codes and zoning. The opportunity is there for us to reduce the minimum lot sizes, to reduce setbacks, to reduce the parking requirements. Those kinds of things that we can do to create higher density. We're looking at areas that maybe we're infilling lots in areas of this town or neighborhoods that already exist. And then we're also looking at expanding and pushing out beyond where our city services already lie. But again, trying to create maybe smaller lots, smaller homes, and in turn more affordable homes for those that want to be a homeowner. And certainly, the same holds true for the developers that are looking at the multi-family properties. So as a city council, those are some of the things that we can do. We can certainly try and make it more efficient for our builders in regards to permitting and at least trying to save them some time, whether they're sitting idle, waiting for re-inspections or waiting for approval on site plans. We need to be as mindful of that in our processes and how we're doing, and certainly encourage that feedback from you. And I guess that's my intentions are to make sure that we're doing that at all times. And I see there's some other questions that get into that in a little more detail, and so I'll leave that for them. But certainly, we can do things. We can be better at what we're doing now, and hopefully in turn create safer, healthier housing for everyone and affordable housing.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate this question, and as Terry said, a lot of these questions kind of work together, and how we build more homes. And I think the first thing again is that we have to make it easier for home builders to be able to build homes. That's the bottom line. And we've again looked at recommendations that have come forward about streamlining our process, our fees, and reducing our fees. We've looked at our zoning laws and how we can make that simpler. We have another question down the line about working with neighborhoods that kind of falls into that same category. I also think that we have to look at what our infill opportunities are, and that's another thing that we've just identified as a city council, that we're going to do inventory of what all of our opportunities could be for new buildings. And I would say that we've already sort of started on that process. We have a number of projects that are slated for downtown even, but I know that our older neighborhoods are also beginning to set up the mechanisms for which to help both rebuild and remodel, but also help support reconstruction in areas that may be vacant and to be filled. We a few months ago launched the new WIDA program that looks at the first-time home buyers and making sure that they have affordable loans to be able to remodel in older neighborhoods. And our city plays a role in helping to connect those pieces as well, and make sure that our housing folks are connected, and making sure that that information is out there. If you're a new home buyer, that you know that that's an opportunity. And I would say last of all, we again need to just focus on what it is that we can do to make it easier. And so, as a candidate, I talked about I'm open to what our city council can do to work with the home builders to make sure that opportunities are there, because we have demand, and we need to be serious about meeting that demand. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Question number 3 to Terry. The Chippewa Valley Housing Task Force has presented recommendations on how best to address the affordable housing challenges the city is currently facing. What role, if any, should the city council play in implementing these recommendations?
Is it alternating?
Just back, or it can.
I don't sense it's supposed to be alternating who answers the question first,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
I'll
just
take
give
it.
them-
I'll lead off on this one. So this is another great question. I think first of all is to point out that this task force that has been working since summer just came to city council, recommended 30 different policies that we can take part in as a city. There's sort of a bucket of short term, I believe it's 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, and then 2-year policy goals to help us create more affordable housing. This is, again, with the fact that we are a destination community and we have high demand, this is an incredibly important challenge that our community faces right now, which is making sure that we have affordable homes. And we have, again, I pointed to the numbers that we had 13% of people in our community that were paying actually over 50% of their entire income to housing. And I don't have to tell you what that translates into. So we've taken these, we've already started down the path of identifying these policy solutions that our city council can have. I think one of the biggest ones is the fact that we have negotiation power often. And so I look at many of our downtown development, much of our downtown development that has happened, and still more to come. I would say there's more new development slated, at least in our downtown, than has already happened. And I think our city council and our city has to take a strong role in negotiating agreements that benefit everyone. And so that is saying that if there's a new project coming, that we're actually being proactive and asking that a certain percent of that development be in affordable housing. I've also said that we should have a commission that specifically focuses on affordable housing and takes these recommendations and make sure that they're a part of our policy process. So when developments come forward, that this commission would actually help focus on whether all of the different grants have been maximized, whether we've looked at the opportunities for affordability, and everything that we can do to make sure that affordable housing is part of the mix. And I would say lastly that we have to be advocates as a local government. We have to make sure that we're on the forefront of being advocates for people who need it most. And so, again, I think the idea of affordability in our community for housing is our most important issue that we have to focus on. It's a challenge that I look forward to working with all of you on in the coming years, because it's something that will make our community a better place. I think we've already come a long way, but I know that our next chapter is going to include affordability.
Thank you, Andrew. Terry, same question?
Yeah, thank you. As Andrew mentioned, we did receive the results in the report from the task force, which again, 80 people from throughout Altoona and the Chippewa Valley and Eau Claire that volunteered their time and effort, thoughts to create this report. Very well done and very well prepared and very well laid out with those goals and that 2-year plan, and that are I think attainable goals as a community. Certainly our role as city council is to try and make sure that they are attainable, and if they're not, how can we improve the chances of those goals being met. I think that they took into account the different aspects of the challenges that our community faces. Certainly not just in inventory and affordable homes, but also the other factors that play into that, including our wages and job opportunities and retaining and keeping people here after they finish school, and then also creating the opportunities for people to get more involved and participate more in the trades, whether it's through the tech school or internships, or either starting at our high school where you guys are actively working with these kids, trying to get them involved with our trades, which is really where we're lacking too in regards to the supportive industry in regards to construction and maintenance. So, I think as long as we continue to be mindful of that as a council and stay on task with the recommendations by the task force, I think we can make this happen, and I think we can actually accomplish the goals of everyone, and still always in the back of our mind, having that constant idea that we have to continue to build. I'm a strong believer in supply and demand. I'm a strong believer that for every new home we build or every new apartment unit that we build, we create a vacancy somewhere else. And each vacancy continues to add to that supply and allows our demand to be met. And I think as long as you guys keep building and our community keeps building at all levels, eventually we'll be able to accomplish that and hopefully meet that demand that that we so need right now.
Great, thank you, Terry. One current challenge facing local home builders and developers is the proposed project fits the qualifications set forth city council due to local neighborhood opposition. This oftentimes leads to added project costs and uncertainty of approval for the builder and or developer. As president of the city council, how could this situation be rectified while taking into consideration the neighborhood opposition, but at the same time creating a pro-housing culture within the city limits?
Yeah, you know, it's a continual battle, you know, and it's something that I keep, you know, thinking about and trying to find ways that we can, you know, I guess, starting with notification and you know, when these proposals are brought before our planning department, and the application process has been started, and you know, that when these notifications are going out, you know, are they being mailed out early enough, and are they covering a wide range of the neighborhood or those that they feel are being affected by this new development, so that there is enough time for people to react and ask questions and become involved as much as they possibly can. I think what we end up having happen is that people are not aware of it, or they're not, you know, taking the time to, you know, and that's not something we often will do, is, you know, look in the paper where they're posting these public notices, and, you know, it's just not a common page for individuals to go to, and so oftentimes they find out about it at the last minute, and then they, you know, they're concerned and they want to get involved, and then we have a public discussion, and all of a sudden there's a delay because maybe we need to have more time to look at, or maybe we need to allow more time for the neighborhood to be heard. But in the end, it ends up causing, as mentioned, a delay for the developer and the builder, and additional cost. And what that means is more additional cost to the purchaser, to the buyer, to the tenant, because those costs, you know, have to be passed along. So it doesn't serve us any good by delaying and letting these projects get, you know, sidetracked for whether it's a week or a month. It makes it difficult for our builders and our developers. So I think the notification is a huge thing that we can really take a look at. We're working on making it better, but certainly we can do a better job than we are now. I think that we need to make sure that our zoning and our codes are clear, and neighborhoods and our neighborhood associations understand what they are and what they say and what's permissible and what's not, and also they need to understand what our intentions are. Again, we're trying to create more healthy and safe housing, you know, at higher density, just because that's the trend now. We need to fill in these areas that aren't completely developed. And so if we do that, and we work the neighborhoods continually throughout the year, not just when there's a project that's being developed, but at all times, and that's my intention too, is to meet with our neighborhood associations on a regular basis and keep them aware of what's coming up and what potentially could be happening, and making sure that they're reaching out to their neighborhoods and letting them know, you know, that these are discussions that we're having, these are things that are coming up. Make sure you let your neighbors and your members of your association know.
Thank you. So this was something that came up in our affordable housing hearing. We held our first ever hearing on affordable housing last fall. And actually we had a number of developers who talked about that there was a slowdown in terms of you know, neighborhoods. Sometimes neighbors weren't necessarily in favor of projects and how that plays out. We also heard that we had a developer there that talked about how, why is it that across the street from me there's a sixplex, but I'm not allowed to build something similar, and yet we're in the same corridor and in the same neighborhood? That makes no sense. And I think these are the challenges that we're going to have to work through, you know, moving forward. I first of all want to point to the fact that over the last decade, we've actually, probably in the last 6 years, we actually expanded our notification system because of this very issue, and I think we may have to look at that again. But what we did is we said we want to have a greater radius around where a project happens. I think we didn't used to put up the signs on the lot so people could take information. I'm not sure how well that works, but that was something that we started doing. And then the other one is what projects qualify and which ones don't. So we expanded that definition as well. And I worked with Councilmember Dave Duax, who was sort of a leader on that at the time, to make sure that that was an expanded notification, because we were having problems with it before. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is the strong neighborhoods, and that you have neighborhoods that are invested and know that their decisions and involvement help and matter, and that they're being listened to. And so as someone who's a longtime member of the North Riverfronts Association, and now the East Hill, you know, without a doubt, if you have a neighborhood association that's proactive and in place, they have a much greater say, you know, over what happens in the neighborhood. And I think the last thing is this idea of turning this what I call the NIMBY culture to YIMBY culture, and that's a yes in my backyard attitude. That neighborhoods and neighborhood leaders realize and understand the importance of the challenge that our community faces in building more homes, and that they get on board with you know, I think what is a changing culture right now, which is how do we build and how do we build affordable, and that they're a part of that process. And as a president of the city council, I will make sure that we're opening up those lines of dialogue with our neighborhood leaders. I know many of them personally, and you know, I look forward to the opportunity to really have conversations, not with just our neighborhood presidents, but with our entire neighborhoods about the role that they can proactively play in helping us to build more and build more affordably.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
An additional challenge facing our members is the permitting and inspection processes. Is there a way this process can be streamlined to benefit all parties? So
this is this is part of the recommendations package that we actually got from the Affordable Housing Task Force, which looks at how do we streamline and better and make our process simpler. I think that's really the crux of it. And you know, one of the things we've already looked at is the fees and the role that fees play, if they're cumbersome, and how do we actually lower them, change them, make sure that you know, that we have an affordable structure of fees. I think in terms of streamlining, I'd actually like to see, especially on projects that are either infill in our older neighborhoods, or we're looking at affordable housing, that we're actually creating a more expedited process for those. I think that developers should be rewarded for helping to figure out some of our most pressing housing challenges that we face. And so I'm open to that, and that's something that I've been talking about. You know, I think beyond that, it's something that I'm all ears. Like, I would love to have those conversations moving forward with our housing task force about what are the ways that we can make this work better, and help builders really, you know, be able to do more housing. And I think, you know, getting back to our hearing last fall, this was one of the challenges that was pointed out, along with some of our challenges around our workforce. And I want to come back to that too, because we heard that really training and folks who you know, are skilled in the trades is something that is in high demand, and it's actually part of the barrier that building faces right now. And so that, as long as with, you know, a streamlined process, is something that I'll be focused on as you know, if elected city council president.
You know, several things that we can do as a council. You know, one, it starts with budgeting, making sure that the staffing needs are there to meet the demands of you, to make sure that we have, you know, enough people working for the city, you know, that can get out and take care of, you know, your needs at the site anyway. So there's not that delay there. The permitting, you know, process, I agree. I think, you know, when we look at our fee schedule, what we just amended, made some changes to this past December, when you look at all the different licensing fees and all the, you know, how much it breaks down into, you know, 20 or 30 or 40 different fees to make an improvement or to a home or to build a new home. And, you know, certainly it would make sense to us to see if we can consolidate that and again make it more efficient for you. But, you know, number one, staffing needs, making sure that we have the people there, and that starts with us, and making sure that the funds are there to hire those people. Number two, you know, we need to sit down with you guys. You guys know this better than we do. You guys are the developers, you're the builders, you have the frustrations, and you need to let us know what they are. And if it means, you know, meeting with us as council members, you know, or as, you know, or planning commission, you know, or staff, or all three, I think it's important that you guys give us your thoughts. And I know that you are, and some of you have been very, you know, outspoken, and we appreciate that. At the same time, you know, we need to actually come up with something that makes sense to you and to the community. Obviously, we have costs too, you know, to make sure that we can get out there and take care of these inspections in a timely fashion, and so we want to make sure that it's, you know, equitable for both parties, both you and the community. And again, all that translates back to the purchaser, to the tenant, because, you know, if we can reduce these costs, you know, then hopefully that passes along to the user, and in turn, again, it's a win-win for everybody. But yeah, certainly, again, one of those things as a community we can always be better at. So looking forward to participating with you and working with you in that regard.
Okay, thank you. The city budget plays an important role in property taxes, which in turn can hinder the ability of residents to own a home. Keeping in mind the impact on property taxes, how will you make budget decisions? If decisions need to be made about what can be funded and what isn't, how will you make that determination? Fair?
Yeah, taxes. You know, and I've said this, you know, every time we talk about our budget. You know, it's the biggest thing that I've learned in being in city governing is taxation and budgets and the reality of it. And, you know, when we look at how much we're allowed to tax and how much we're allowed to spend, based on levies that are set by the state, and then we continue to grow at an alarming rate, and we continue to develop more and more of our city, and you know, increasing, you know, more and more demands. I met with the police union last night, and they talk about, you know, more and more events that every year we see planned in our community, whether it's in our parks or festivals or music events. All these things put demands on all these different departments. And, you know, those are good things. Obviously, we want to continue to be prosperous. We want to continue to grow. We want your businesses to continue to thrive as developers and builders and so on. But, you know, it's difficult to meet all the demands that our community has. I think that, you know, the process for me and where we have our challenges, my opponent and I, is how we make these changes to our budget, and how we actually, you know, sit down and look at what is going to make the greatest impact, you know, for the greatest amount of, you know, citizens in Eau Claire, and how can we make sure that all of our dollars that we are spending are maximized to the fullest. And so in this regard, you know, in regards to taxes and you know, what we can do to try and maintain that level, you know, and I think, you know, we really do run our community on a shoestring at this point. I mean, it's, as I mentioned, difficult, but I think at the same time we have a city manager that's conscious of our costs and our spending. We have department heads that are conscious of our costs and our spending, and that carries forward to us. And I think as a council, we need to be the ones that are even more fiscally responsible at all times. And I think there's money that we're spending that isn't really being you know, spent wisely, and I don't think it's reflective of the needs of everyone in our community. And I think that's the answer to at least maintaining our taxes so housing is affordable to everyone, and it is, you know, people are capable of owning a home and not being deterred from that right and that privilege and that hope because of the inability to pay the property taxes. So a difficult balance, but we'll continue to work on it and work together.
Thank you. And you know, this is something that comes up at pretty much every single one of the forums that we do, and it's, you know, it comes back to the fact that our community is growing, and it has been growing, and it's we actually saw record growth in 2017 that allowed for, so our formula right now allows that if there's an increase in overall valuation in our community, then our property tax percent can go up. The problem is that year after year, we're squeezed by the state. And so we get less state funding, less shared revenue to pay for the services that we once did. We have less than half of the shared revenue we did in the early 90s from the state. And so the only way that, as Terry pointed out, the only way we can fund our police, our fire, our parks, is to make sure that we're putting, you know, we have to make it up some way, and we put in our property tax. That's the only place that our city is allowed to raise taxes. So, you know, that's putting us in a hard spot. And I would say that our city and our budget is lean as it is. You know, we've really cut in many years. In the last few years, in the first year, they were actually able to add money. And granted, we added to the budget. This 2019 budget has a nearly $1 million increase for our police department, and our fire and EMS got $400,000 new dollars. But keep in mind, it's just to keep up with the current service demands. It's not adding new positions. It's because of healthcare costs and benefits and all the things and wages increasing. So we were able to keep up with our current service demands, but only because we had record growth. In terms of our budget, the way that our budget works, and my opponent knows this, is that our city manager delivers a balanced budget. And we pass a balanced budget at city council. We pass a balanced budget. And by law, we have to. And if city council members want to make any changes to the budget, it comes in November. That's how our budget is done, and our city manager has made it clear that as executive, he's presenting a balanced budget, and as legislators, whatever we pass has to also be balanced. So all of our amendments come at the 11th hour. That is the process. And I've talked many times about how that process is not a good process. Throughout the whole budget, I actually brought that up. I'm not certain that my opponent did. I brought up how this is not a process that is working. Either way, when city council made changes to the budget, we only changed 0.5%, even less, of what's proposed. So in this last budget, it's, you know, we have over $1 million budget, or $100 million budget at our city. We don't even change even, you know, $300,000 of that. So to put into perspective, you know, the budget that we pass is something that has to reflect the needs of people in the community we represent. And I feel like our budget does that. I'm at the end of my 3 minutes. Was that really 3 minutes?
Yeah.
When I get into the budget.
Okay, so last question. What opportunities do you feel are currently available to the city council but are underutilized at this time? And if developed, they would enhance, improve, and strengthen relations that would foster growth and advancement within the Chippewa Valley housing industry?
So I think there's two things that come to mind. The first is, what is the role of our city council in terms of helping meet the demands for training and trades? And what can we do as a city to support? Now, this is something that has traditionally been a part of the technical college system, our high schools, and is something that you know, I think we've heard feedback, which is, what can the city do at taking a bigger role in actually helping to provide more skilled labor so we can build more homes? And so that's something that I think is an opportunity that we're not necessarily, that we haven't necessarily looked at, and is an opportunity that we need to look at and be proactive in. I think the other opportunity is, how do we make sure that we're incentivizing good jobs in our community and high-paying jobs? And that's another piece of this is, you know, I've always felt that if we invest in our quality of life, that is gonna be the number one indicator of whether folks want to start a business here, want to move here, want to come to school here. The idea of being in a community that has high quality of life and amenities that follow that is something that I think our city has to continue to invest in. So, you know, again, it's this idea, we've talked about affordability of housing. If you have a job that is paying, you know, $10 an hour, $12 an hour, your ability to actually even make rent, let alone potentially buy a home, is severely compromised. And so again, wages have to be a part of this discussion. In fact, in our affordable housing recommendation, wages was one of the number one things that we've looked at as a city, which is if we're not focused on living wages as a community, then we're losing out on the ability for people to actually be able to afford a home and afford to put a roof over their head. So that's all I got.
Thank you.
Can I get the time from the budget? Go back to it.
You know, I think we do a good job. We have been doing a good job of the quality of life portion of bringing people to Eau Claire here, and you know, and I think it's a strategy that we see being successful throughout the country. And, you know, there has to be incentives for people to want to move to Eau Claire, and so we look at music and culture and our trails and our bike paths and using our waterways and you know, how as a community can we continue to enhance our parks and everything that goes with that, because those are parts of the reason, or a big part of the reasons that people decide to stay here. Obviously, if they decide to move here or continue to live here after they've graduated, then we need the housing to make sure that they have a place to live and that, you know, it fits their needs and they get to be a part of the community that they're growing to love. So we start looking at now what other things can we do to enhance, you know, further development. We start looking at transportation, and you know, can we make changes to our transportation that would enhance certain areas that maybe aren't fully developed now, that would improve opportunities for more building and more housing, and yet still allow them the luxury or the convenience of maybe not having to need 2 cars anymore. Maybe they can be, you know, maybe you buy one vehicle, maybe they're on a bus route, or maybe they can ride their bikes to work. And so the more business and jobs that we can bring closer to housing is one thing that we can continue to be better at, and make sure that we're mindful of. You know, economic development is a big part of any community. It's certainly you know, another thing that we can be better at, finding ways to make sure that we can recruit more industry into our city, and certainly that brings higher paying jobs and more people buying homes and more people moving and either downsizing or upsizing. And so I think it's important that, you know, as a city, that we're constantly conscious of that and working towards you know, greater economic development. I mentioned this earlier, certainly another thing that we can be better at is, again, listening to you. And you guys have ideas, you're creative, you're in business, you've been successful because of that. And so if there are things that you feel we can be doing to enhance greater development, you know, then please pass that along to us so that we can facilitate that. I think, you know, as a community, we'll continue to work hard with all those ideas in mind, and we're going to continue to grow, and I'm confident that Eau Claire is going to be a great place to live for many, many years, forever. This is where I plan to spend my retirement years, and I look forward to doing those as your city council president.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to open it up and see if there are any questions from the floor. Be the same format as before. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
This is not really housing related, but nationally the political environment seems to just be getting worse and worse about partisan lines and struggling along with partisanship versus doing what's best for everyone. How do you feel the council and Claire handles that? Do you feel like you work together well for the greater good, or are you struggling fighting against one another?
fighting amongst each other. I think overall, and I talk about this a lot, I think there should be no partisanship on our council. I think that, you know, the intent there when it was created and still today is defined on our nomination papers that, you know, that are circulated. It is a nonpartisan role of this community. And that is the only way that it can really truly work. You know, when we create that balance of, you know, representing everybody and everyone's needs and everyone's wants and leaving all the political platform issues aside. And so I think as a council, it's important that, you know, we go into every legislative session with the idea that you know, every decision we make and every action that we take is a true representation of how our community is, you know, built and grown. I spend a lot of time in our meetings introducing compromise, again, trying to bring it back to the middle on some of the initiatives that are brought before us. But this is a change that's going on, as mentioned, across the country. You know, there is a new idea in regards to politics and whether or not they should be involved in our community governing process. I think is maybe where we differ a little bit, and our role is to make sure that we're taking care of you and your wants and needs, and only that. Our assemblymen, our state senators, our congressmen, you know, Madison and Washington is where these other political issues should be legislated. And here in Eau Claire, we should be focused on, you know, what's important and what matters most to us. And that's the way that I intend to lead and be mindful of, and constantly trying to bring everything back to a middle, trying to find a happy meeting ground, and you know, ideally, you know, with one intention, making sure that it best serves the community. And so I'll continue to work hard at that as a council president.
Thank you, and thanks for this question. And you know, I think first of all that no matter what level it is, I don't care if it's in your neighborhood association, your city council, your state, your federal, even your family, even your friends, politics is what we do. And you know, the idea that somehow we're a politics-free zone is not the case. And you know, I think I've heard this charge of partisanship come you know, over and over, and I've always said, well, what issue are you talking about? Because when you actually look at the different issues, you know, then I could say, okay, so you don't agree that we need a living wage, or you don't agree that you know, we need positions at the library to help people who are homeless. Well, okay, let's have a discussion about that. But to say that it's partisan because we're tackling some of these issues, you know, I think that rings hollow. And I think, again, that's not the biggest issue our community faces. Partisanship, you know, is far, far down on the list of things that we need to be concerned about. We have our affordable housing crisis right now. We're trying to figure out how we're going to make sure that we don't have 300 children in our schools who are considered homeless. And so, you know, I tried to bring this conversation back to the issues that actually impact people's lives, and what are we doing as a community to make sure we're actually impacting folks' lives. And we'll have policy disagreements, and that's politics. And I think we have to be honest about that. Not only that, I will point out again, is that on almost every issue we work on, not everyone agrees. Let's be honest about that. Is whether it was the jail expansion downtown, whether it was the confluence, whether to even build there, whether to offer the incentives. You know, those are decisions that not everyone in the community agreed with. And that's part of politics. And so I think what it comes down to at the end of the day for me is that regardless of whether you might have a difference on a policy, is that we're elevating our conversation in a respectful way. And we're you know, figuring out a way, whether, you know, as a council president or as a council member, that we say, we may vote differently on this one, but we still have 32 agenda items left, and we're gonna figure out a way to work together on them to make sure they work. And that's the thing about our local city council is, no matter what philosophy we bring to the table, whether it's conservative, liberal, or something else, we have to work together to make sure that we're solving our community's problems.
Okay, any other questions?
I have, go ahead, ladies first.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Okay. A couple of things, both of you said that concerned me. One of you said that owning a house was a right, and that had to be dealt with through government. I disagree with that totally. It's not a right. It's a privilege, perhaps. If you wanna own a home, it shouldn't be the government buys it for you. The other guys talked about living wage. Do you feel it's the city council's place in our community to tell a businessman what he has to pay someone to work? I find that a very slippery slope. Yes, there is a labor shortage, and the supply and demand should drive that, not a city council. So do you guys feel the living wage is someplace the city council needs to be sticking their nose on private enterprise? That's my question.
I'll try to go first on both of those. We'll get through. So we may have a disagreement on this issue, and part of it is that, our country has seen huge success, and, we're the richest country in the world right now. And yet we look around our community and we see people working jobs where, we have Abby Van, we have drivers of our air transit could start out at $8.50 an hour, or someone who's working at retail, retail starting at $10.50 or something. And to me, that speaks volumes about, how are we gonna have jobs where folks can actually afford to pay for housing or to pay for the increasing cost of healthcare or gas or food? And that's where I do think that government can have a role in saying, at the very minimum, this is what you ought to be getting paid. Now, as a community, we raised our minimum wage in 2007, I believe it was, when that was still possible. Now we don't have that power anymore. The living wage ordinance, which you're probably aware of, was specifically around city employees, contracts that we have in the community, and building and developments. And my feeling is look, if people aren't being paid enough and can't make it, maybe government has a role to step in and say, this is at least the base of it that you ought to get paid. So, we may have a disagreement on that issue, but I respect your opinion about, what the role of government is in that. I think in terms of moving forward, one thing that we can do as a community is, we have opportunities to actually incentivize and make sure that we're seeing jobs that come to our community that are paying a living wage. When we have a proposal in front of us from a new company, and it's, what are you willing to offer in terms of the Sky Park or any of our other business parks? What are you willing to offer? Free land, tax incentives, etc. We ought to be saying, well, what are you going to be paying? That should be on the forefront of what we're negotiating, is what are you willing to pay? And so I've talked about how living wage can be a part of that and a part of our discussion. In terms of the home piece, I think I don't know. I won't go down that road. What I will say is I think that the basic thing is we have to figure out a way where we've identified that a whole lot of folks in our community are paying more than 30% of their income to their housing, to their home, and how do we make sure that that's a more affordable proposition? Because right now that's hurting everyone. We don't have people who can afford homes. That also translates to people who can't afford their child care, they can't afford to save, they can't afford to put their kid into college. So it affects everyone. That's part of the reason I talk about it a lot.
Thank you, Adam. Terry?
Yeah, living wage, I guess I've been self-employed my whole life. I've never really had a paycheck. I never had my health care covered for me. It's always been as a business owner, something that you take on and accept. I'm conscious of wages and what's going on in our community and whether or not it meets, the current growth in our cost of living. So, you know, and certainly, unfortunately, it isn't, you know, across the board meeting. Our wages are not keeping up with our cost of living, and you know, again, that double-edged sword. We're creating all these successes. We're building a beautiful community. A lot of people want to move here and be here and live this experience. But at the same time, with that comes higher cost because there is that demand. But you know, I see it. I see a lot of the discrepancies in the wages changing on their own. You know, I drive by, you know, Culver's or CVS and, you know, different businesses that are, you know, showing wages starting at $13.50 an hour and healthcare benefits. And I see, you know, employees, and you guys see them every day. You know, they're getting $18 an hour here, and they're getting $22 an hour in Hudson. And so, you know, we see them going to Hudson because they're getting $4 more an hour to work for a subcontractor there than they are here. So eventually, we, you know, as an employer, as a business, you realize you do what you have to do to make that work. And you didn't come up with that idea or that, you know, realization because we told you to as a city. You came to that realization because you know what you need to do to make sure you have the staff to get the job done. And so I support that idea. I support that you know, that you know, market mentality in the sense that you know, this is a business, and it's important that we're mindful of that. At the same time, we are a community that represents everyone, and we need to have, you know, compassion towards all income segments, and so I want to make sure that as a community, when we're looking at economic development and inviting new businesses here, that, you know, we have a good understanding of what type of wages are we looking at, what will they bring to our community that can help us all grow. Same with the contracts that we award. You know, rather than us stating what the wages must be, but, you know, making a decision, making it part of the whole decision process of, all right, what services they're going to provide for us, how good of a job will they continue to do for us, and what kind of wages are they going to be paying. And then as a community, we can weigh all those things and decide, you know, what brings the greatest amount of benefit to us.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Any other questions?
Yeah, I co-chair the Jonah Affordable Housing Task Force, and as such, we were a member of that larger regional Affordable Housing Task Force that has made recommendations to the City Council. One of the recommendations that Jonah supports that didn't make the final cut for the recommendations to the City Council was the creation of an advisory committee that would look at all development proposals through an affordable housing lens and make recommendations to the City Council or the Plan Commission on how this particular proposal might affect affordable housing in our community. I want to know, do you support such an advisory committee? And if so, as City Council President, what would you do to make it happen?
You know, I guess I'd have to, you know, I know it was a big part of the discussion in this committee, and I, you know, it wasn't in the writing as far as the recommendations. It was certainly voiced often, this advisory committee. And, you know, where it sits in relation to our Plan Commission and to our City Council and all the different other commissions and committees and boards that are part of our community, part of the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. You know, I'd have to see how all that would work, and at what process does this advisory committee become a part. You know, we talk about, you know, streamlining, we talk about creating efficiencies and trying to make sure that we're mindful of time and what that looks like financially, you know, both for the developer and for the user. But at the same time, I think it's important that there is something there that brings us back to the goal, to make sure that all housing is affordable for all users, for all income levels, for all segments of our community. And maybe that, you know, is a part of our planning commission process, or, I guess I'd have to see exactly where and how it fits into that. And certainly, you know, the more people we have involved civically, the more people that we have expressing ideas and thoughts, you know, and in the end, it makes for a stronger community. But at the same time, we wanna make sure that, you know, we're mindful of all parts of that process, so. You know, I look forward to this evolving, you know, this whole process, the task force and the recommendations in the next 2 years and how we make that work, but at the same time, you know, looking at what other things we can do as a council.
Thank you, and it's a good question. I think, you know, first of all, just to point out the role of our committees and commissions and boards in our city, and the idea of, you know, bringing experts and bringing, you know, leaders in the industry, bringing neighborhood association leaders, and so many more together is important. It's an important part of democracy that you have folks that are stepping up and involved and helping to make the community better. So I'll give a couple examples. We have the Waterways and Parks Commission, and they're really looking at what are we doing to make sure we preserve our rivers and make sure that our parks are an amenity that are valued. And so, you know, our Waterways and Parks Commission, while it is a step that you have to go through if you're building next to a waterway or park, you know, those are the folks who serve on those boards are given the charge of figuring out as a community how do we value that, and how do we make sure we're valuing it. Our BPAC, our Bicycle Pedestrian Commission, focuses on making sure that we have more rideability in our community and make sure that both pedestrians are safe, cyclists are safe, and other modes of alternate modes of transportation are safe. And again, that's something that people really value about Eau Claire. We have the second most miles of bike trails in our community, and it's in no small part to the fact that we have a commission of folks who help to push for that and advocate for it. And so, you know, I think without a doubt it would have to be a part of that a streamlined process. But the idea of how do we bring a lens of affordability in our community to our building is something I support and would support. And the commission itself, I've actually was the author of one of our commissions, our Sustainability Commission. So I have experience actually how to craft legislation to do that. And what it takes, also thinking about who are the people that are there. You know, and from all the industry leaders to advocates on affordable housing, you know, to people who are actually living that experience of affordability as well. And so that's what's I think important about it, is that we have the different voices at the table who can help us as a community bring that focus. And so it is something I would support. And you know, if elected, I'll make sure we move forward on it.
Any other questions?
I don't know exactly what how this is supposed to work, but with all of the with the difficulty in defining the barriers or the city lines, you know, we're in a community where Altoona and Eau Claire are often confused as to who's who. Lake Hallie, same thing. Town of Washington, all of the different smaller communities that are so close to us. Is there a level of cooperation, or maybe it's competition or whatever it is with these other communities that are either challenges or things that we can use to our advantage to help the city of Eau Claire?
And I think, and that's a good question, I think that's, especially when it comes to affordability and this affordability commission, my feeling is we need to have regional representation, and we need to make sure that there's a fair level playing field across the different communities. Because I think if we're not cognizant of that, then it's going to create its own challenges in terms of where building happens and what's affordable and what's not. And so we've talked about, and I've had discussions with our city manager about that there has to be, you know, we have to be working closely with Altoona and other local governments in terms of our planning and our zoning and making sure that we're creating that level playing field. Because I think you understand that could be a very challenging thing if it's different across different communities and we're not collaborating on it. And so, do you want to add to that as a planning commission, long-time planning commission?
agree, I think it's important that, you know, there is that level playing field throughout the whole Chippewa Valley, the whole metro area, to avoid the opportunity of one area being, more popular than another because of cost savings or efficiencies or so on. So I think, yeah, I think our goal with the task force, you know, encompass the Chippewa Valley as best as it can, and I think, you know, we'll continue to, you know, as a body, a governing body, and also as, you know, city staff and our city manager, you know, working together with all these communities to make sure that there is a consistency there, so that, you know, it is equal playing ground for everyone when it comes to building and development, and just the consistencies of, you know, what is here is the same, you know, in Altoona and in the town of Washington. I mean, we start getting into counties now, and we get into Halley and Chippewa, and so, you know, we'll have to you know, work with that and more broader, different scope. But, yeah, I think it's the only way we can keep moving forward is to work together.
Any other questions?
I have one more. Has to do with, one of you of the two gentlemen has been quoted as, we are at this point not a sanctuary city, but we should welcome everybody. As a council president, would you ever vote for Eau Claire becoming a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants?
Is that question considered relevant to this discussion?
Well, it does, because you've got jobs, you've got housing. The whole community is affected by that. And I was told we could ask any question after the initial ones. So I'd like to know what you'd be thinking on that.
From illegal immigrants, or are you talking like migrant labor or legal immigration?
Not legal immigration, not at all.
Illegal immigration.
But a sanctuary city does not include legal immigration. Sanctuary city is for anybody who wants to come, regardless. And of course, there's laws, but they're sidestepped for whatever reason. And I'm just curious if Eau Claire would, as a city council president, if you would support something like that. That's my question.
You know, for me to answer that question, and I'm not trying to sidestep giving you a direct answer, but I would need to know more of what that really means and what that looks like as a community. And, you know, certainly, you know, we're gonna be mindful of you know, families and individuals, and you know, certainly don't want to see, you know, families torn apart in an event that, you know, it gets to, you know, gets to that point. I just don't know enough about, you know, what a sanctuary city looks like, you know, what qualifies a city to be, you know, as a sanctuary. And then, you know, what is our role in city governing in that regard? You know, the policing and the enforcing of it, and what that looks like. I don't know enough about it. You know, certainly it's not something that we have here or in and around us. And you know, before I want to answer that question, I need to know more about what it looks like. But I think we're a country that welcomes immigrants and have for 300 years or more, and you know, I think that we'll always continue to be that country that welcomes you know, immigrants coming from our countries. And the goal, I think, for all of them is to become citizens. That's why they're coming here. They want to live, you know, the American dream, if that's what their dream is. And so we have to do everything we can to make sure that they have the opportunities to do that. But as far as, you know, supporting us as being designated a sanctuary city, I don't know exactly what that means.
I think that question.
Yeah, you know, I think a few things. My parents actually immigrated to this country, and I went through the long process of getting citizenship. It is incredibly difficult, and it's probably more so now. So for me, it was 5 trips to the INS office in St. Paul. You pay hundreds of dollars before you know, before you get any knowledge of whether you're going to be granted citizenship. You take tests, you do interviews, they do background, the whole thing.
that's sort of like getting fees to do something in Eau Claire.
Yeah, what I've
You
said is
don't know
that.
if you're gonna.
You don't know if you're gonna, you don't know if you're gonna.
Sorry.
So, what I've said is that if everyone in our country had to become a citizen, go through the process, we'd only have 5% we'd only have 5% citizenship in this country. So it's hard, and it's a difficult process. As someone's go out, yeah, you have, so anyway, the bottom line though is, I've talked about how we need to be welcoming. And what I'm talking about is the fact that, you know, our country is made up of folks who want, you know, to be a part of this experience and live a part of this, be part of this democracy. And, you know, to think that it's always gonna be a smooth transition, it is not true. And it wasn't for me, it wasn't for my family, but, you know, I had an opportunity to have my community invest in me, good schools, good public schools, and make something of myself. And I feel like we ought to be giving those opportunities. And that's what when I talk about a welcoming community, it's how do we make sure that people know and feel welcome.
So that's if they're legal or illegal.
Well, here's the thing.
It doesn't matter.
Well, and here's the thing, is that, and we may have disagreements about working towards citizenship and what does that look like. If someone's here illegally, if they're working in our restaurants, if they're working on our farms, if they're picking our vegetables, you know, is there a pathway or not? Like, those are discussions I think that are probably outside the bounds of this, you know, of this conversation. But in terms of law enforcement, I can say that our local law enforcement, our police, you know, they have very strong ties to both our you know, Hispanic and our Muslim populations that are here, and there's a huge amount of trust, and I think that's one of the things that matters most. Because we don't need to talk about sanctuary or not. We need to talk about, is there a trust with law enforcement? Because it impacts our schools, it impacts our businesses, and so forth. And there are ICE raids in our community. There's ICE raids that are happening in other communities around Eau Claire. And what is the role of local law enforcement? And I'm proud to say that our local law enforcement has actually been building a trust with our community of immigrants. And so, you know, to me, that's what matters most, is are we welcoming, are we making sure that we're giving opportunity for folks, you know, first and foremost. And we may have disagreements about citizenship and the pathway to citizenship, and that's okay, but I hope that we continue to be welcoming.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank both candidates for coming. We're lucky as a city to have two strong candidates, and good luck to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.